Here's a little warm-up slide from the Production Possibilities Frontier with a feel-good message for yourself. So today we are looking at our very first microeconomics lesson. We're looking at supply and demand, focusing mostly on demand. We'll look at what is demand. So we'll define the market demand. We'll construct the demand schedule and curve. We'll explain the law of demand. And we'll recognize the factors that will shift the demand curve, which we also call the determinants of demand. So definition, a consumer's willingness, so willingness is important, and ability to purchase a product at a particular time and place. Now we could say a product or service. And we'll look at why all of these different components are important. So I like to ask the class, who would like to buy a Lamborghini Aventador? Lots of hands go up inevitably. Nice looking car. But then if I ask who is able to buy a Lamborghini Aventador right now, walking into the showroom without talking to your parents, who would be able to? And not many hands go up, if any. So the difference between willing and able, pretty explanatory. Willing, you have a desire, but able, can you actually come up with the money to fulfill that? The relevance in time and place for demand. So right now you're a student studying hard with further studies on your mind, university and so on. But at some future date, if you're a nuclear physicist, a successful judge, or a renowned surgeon, you may be well willing and able to buy a Lamborghini. But at this particular time and place, you may be willing to buy a Lamborghini, but you do not have a demand for a Lamborghini. So supply and demand. So imagine that we have a variety of your favorite candies. So if these don't happen to be them, think of something else that you really like. And let's look at what you would be willing and able to buy at various prices, thinking in terms of a week, because we need to put it in terms of, are we looking at it for a day, a year, a week, or so on. So typically, someone might say, well, you fill out your own demand curve. I'll do mine. So we see as the price goes down, typically quantity demanded goes up. So what I like to do is pretend that we're dealing now with an economy that's very small. We only have 4 students in our economy, and I ask for 4 volunteers to give me their individual demand schedule so that we can come up with the market demand, keeping in mind that we have a very small economy with only 4 students. Sorry for the barking. Another student might have a demand schedule, something like this. And someone else. And someone who really was not particularly fond of candies might have something that looks like this. Okay, so to get the market demand, we're going to add across all of the individual demands, quantity demanded, at different prices. So at $5, we're looking at 3. At $4, we're looking at 6. At 3, 11. At 2, 16. At 1, 11, 18, 23. At 50 cents, 30, and just 25 cents. So we can see as the price decreases, our quantity demanded increases. So if we were to graph that on an axis, we're going to have quantity demanded or quantity on the x-axis, and we're going to have price on the y-axis. It's important to realize that price is always on the y-axis. We noticed at a high price we had a very small demand, and it increased as the price decreased. So we'll pretend that it worked out to be a nice straight line. We'll call this the demand curve. And at this level of economics, very often you're going to see the demand and the supply curve as straight lines. So our demand schedule, this was the table that listed all the items demanded at various prices. So just to recap that, our particular demand schedule looked like this. And we theoretically plotted those on the previous slide to come up with the demand curve. Oh, so the demand, so the graphical representation, we'll just do that one more time and mark this up with the demand curve. We could actually plot the points if we're being really precise. The law of demand. This is very important. I'm going to give you the initial definition, but there's going to be a term missing. So I'm going to come back to the term that you really need to commit to memory. But you have noticed as price falls, the quantity demanded increases. And it's important that you say quantity demanded and not demand, because that's going to mean something else. And we'll look at that in a few slides. And as price rises, the quantity demanded decreases. So as the price goes up, you have a smaller quantity demanded. This law is why the demand curve slopes downwards and to the right. So in other words, so this is the one that you really want to commit to memory. The law of demand states other things remaining the same, the higher the price of the good, the smaller is the quantity demanded, and vice versa. Another expression for all things remaining the same, you could replace that with ceteris paribus. The higher the price of a good, the smaller is the quantity demanded. This assumes that when there are a number of different factors that determine something, only one is changing and all of the others are held constant. So think for a moment in a scientific experiment. You do a controlled experiment and you allow for only one variable to change. Well, this is a social science, so we are assuming, because we can't control people's actions, not entirely at least, we're assuming that only one thing is changing and that everything else is remaining the same. So there's two reasons the demand curve slopes downwards. One is the substitution effect. We'll explain in the next two slides. And the other one is the income effect. So the substitution effect points out that when the relative price of a product rises, people buy less of it because the opportunity cost of consuming it has increased. So in plain language, if the price of the good in question increases more, or it's increasing, and the price of other goods that are substitutes are either falling or not increasing as fast. So we've got this relative price of the product rising relative to the other substitutes. If that's the case, when we look at the opportunity cost of consuming or buying this good or service, then it's increased because what you are now giving up is more of the other goods. The income effect points out that a higher price for a product effectively lowers people's incomes and as a result reduces how much they consume. So if the price of what you're consuming is going up, it means that your income now is taking you less far. You can't buy as much of it. So in effect, you feel as if you are poorer. Quantity demanded versus demand. The quantity demanded, so we'll refer to this as QD, of a good is the amount consumers plan to buy in a given period of time at a particular price. This is also something very good to commit to memory. QD is a point on the curve. We know that once we have unlimited desires and wishes for products, but the quantity demanded shows the amount that people are actually willing to buy. So So let's look at the quantity demanded, different points along the graph at various price points. So this point here at $40, the quantity demanded is 100 widgets. At $30, that point on the graph, it's 150 widgets. At $15, again, this point on the curve is 200 widgets. So what happens to quantity demanded when price changes? Well, we know because of the law of demand, the price goes up, quantity demanded is going to go down, and we know if price goes down, quantity demanded will go up. So that's intuitive. A lot of material and economics will be intuitive. So what happens to quantity demanded when price changes? Okay, so when the price of the good in question changes, you are moving along the curve. This is very important. So the good that we're tracking, the good that we're interested in, if price changes, we're moving along the curve. The quantity demanded will increase or decrease depending on if price is going up or down. So quantity demanded versus demand. Demand, on the other hand, is the entire relationship between all possible prices and the quantities that people demand at every possible price. So in other words, demand is the curve itself. It's all those relationships. At this point, the quantity demanded would be this, and at another price, the quantity demanded would be something else. And all of those relationships form the entire curve. The demand curve also shows the highest price people are willing to pay for the last unit purchased. Because the amount that people are willing to pay measures their benefit from the good, the demand curve also equals the marginal benefit curve. So why does the marginal benefit decrease as you consume more? So in other words, why does the demand curve slope downwards as well? So if we look at the other side of the graph, well, we know when we talked about the example of getting water in the desert, for your first glass of water, your marginal benefit would be very high and you'd be willing to pay almost anything. As you come across the 5th, the 10th, the 25th glass of water, you value it much less, so you'd be willing to pay much less for it. So this is why it decreases as you consume more. So in terms of what's happening up here, in terms of the highest price, so if this is the demand curve, this is quantity, and this is price, this is 0. As we're getting up here, for one more unit, it measures what is the highest price that people are willing to pay for the last unit purchased. So that's also why it's referred to as the marginal benefit curve. So the market for backpacks, we'll look at, in this case, the quantity is going to be in thousands, the price in Canadian dollars. And so again, as we move to that upper point of like the last unit, you'll see what is the highest price that people are willing to pay, and hence what is the marginal benefit for one more unit. Excuse me. This is just, this is where we're heading, not to get too concerned about why this forms the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price, but it helps if we bring in the supply curve to see what's happening to the market for any particular good, of what's happening to the price and what's happening to the quantity. So we'll always be focusing at this point on the equilibrium point and what happens after, in this case, demand changes. So it's just to bring a bit of relevance into the scenarios, and we'll talk about how certain things make sense when the price goes up and quantity demanded either increases or decreases and so on. So determinants of demand. What we want to look at is what shifts the demand curve. So increases or decreases the demand curve. So we're going to look at the market for ice cream. We're going to assume that ice cream is $4 per liter, and what factors might influence you to either buy more ice cream or less ice cream when the price remains constant at the $4 per liter. So the ice cream itself is not going to change, and the price of remains constant at $4 per liter. So what would happen? So these are called determinants of demand, and they can cause the demand curve to shift, to increase, or to decrease. So it could shift right, which is an increase. It could shift left, which is a decrease. So before we get into this, let's look at, just to make sure that you understand graphically how these play out. So if we have an increase in demand, we'll have quantity, price. We're going to call the first one a demand curve 1. We're going to shift it to the right, showing it with 2 horizontal arrows, and we'll call this demand 2. That's an increase in demand. If we have a decrease in demand, it's going to shift the other way. So quantity, price, D1, D2, and it shifts to the left. If we have an increase in quantity demanded, because the price has decreased, we're going to move along the curve. Again, quantity, price, demand curve, and we have price decreasing. So we'll have P1 here, the corresponding Q1 is here, and we'll have the price drop to P2, and we'll see that indeed the quantity demanded increased, and we have moved along the curve from one point to the other point. So the quantity demanded has changed. A decrease in quantity demanded. So we have an increase in price having happened. So again, quantity, price, demand curve, and let's go from P1 here with the corresponding Q1 to P2 up here. So the price has increased in this case. There's the Q2. So the quantities demanded have decreased, and we have moved along the curve this way. So please make sure that you're very careful with your language. If you say an increase in demand, you are automatically talking about an increase in the entire demand curve shifting to the right. A decrease in demand, it's shifted to the left. And an increase or decrease in quantity demanded, you've moved along the curve. So let's show graphically what happens when the demand for ice cream increases. So this means that consumers are willing and able to buy more ice cream at each price point. So here's demand 1. Let's call this demand 2. So now at $6, we're now willing to buy, let's say, 6. At $4, we're willing to buy, let's say, 8. And at $3, we're now willing to buy, let's say, 11. So let's just pick one point, let's say the $4. So before the increase in demand, at $4, consumers were willing and able to buy, so at $4, we're willing and able to buy 4 liters. After the increase in demand, at $4, consumers are now willing and able to buy, so at $4, willing and able to buy 8 liters. And this is true for all of the other price points. If ice cream had been $6 before, they were willing and able to buy 2. Now they're willing and able to buy 6 liters. At $3, Before, they were willing and able to buy 5 liters, and now they're willing and able to buy 11 liters. And that makes sense. If for some reason ice cream is more desirable now, it makes sense that at all of the old price points, that people would be willing and able to now buy more because it's more desirable. So let's look at what can shift the demand curve. We're going to look at these determinants of demand. Prices of related goods, and they can be twofold if they're related. One, they can be substitutes. So these are goods that can be used in place of the product being studied. A rise in the price of the substitute of a product shifts the demand curve for the product rightward. So why would that be? Let's look at a concrete example. For ice cream, it could be frozen yogurt as a substitute. So you really are indifferent to whether you're having ice cream or frozen yogurt, so they're substitutes. If the price of the substitute being frozen yogurt goes up, the demand now for ice cream will increase because people will switch their purchases from frozen yogurt to ice cream. And likewise, with the same logic, if a fall in the price of frozen yogurt were to happen, people would switch from ice cream to frozen yogurt, and their demand for ice cream would decrease. So let's look at tracking the market for ice cream, and let's have the price of frozen yogurt increases. So we know that people will switch to ice cream. So the demand for ice cream is going to increase. We'll call this D1, we'll call this D2. And I brought in the supply curve simply so you could see this was the old equilibrium. This is the new equilibrium. This is the old price, and this is the new price. So what ended up happening is that the price increased, and so did the quantity demanded. It went up as well because we are consuming more at a higher price. And that makes sense. If the demand for a product is increased, we would expect people to consume more of it, and it would also be realistic to assume that the market would respond and charge a higher price. Prices of related goods. So goods used in combination with the good understudy. So let's look at, instead of ice cream, we could think of DVDs and DVD players. That's a little more concrete in terms of complements because a DVD is nothing without the DVD player and vice versa. So you absolutely must have them together. But for some people, die-hard ice cream fans, for them it might be sprinkles. Could be the ice cream cone. It could be the chocolate sauce. And as one student pointed out, how about the spoon? Or, well, could be a spoon that we like to have with it. Sorry. So it's a little bit more of a stretch for ice cream than it is for DVD and DVD players, but let's look at what's happening. If we have a rise in the price of a complement, so DVDs go up in price, do you think people will want to buy as many DVD players? Probably not. So the demand would shift to the left. There would be a decrease in demand. On the other hand, if the price of, let's say, sprinkles and cones and chocolate sauce and all of those things went down, people may now demand more ice cream, and the demand curve could shift to the right. Now I just want to point out one small thing in spelling. Complements with an E. If I say complement with an I, I'm saying, Ma, you look absolutely marvelous today. That is a complement with an I. In economics, we want to use the complement with an E, goods that are used in combination with each other. All right, so let's have the price of sprinkles, sauce, cones goes up. and we have a nation of people who absolutely insist on having sprinkles, chocolate sauce, or butterscotch sauce and cones with their ice cream. If that's the case, we could expect the demand for ice cream to decrease. So shift to the left. We'll call this D2. And we'll look at what happens in the market. This will be Q2, which is a decrease from the original quantity, and P2, which is a decrease from the original equilibrium price. So we have price goes down, quantity demanded went down because we are at a new point here as opposed to the old point. And that makes sense. If a good is less in demand, we would expect people to consume less, so the quantity demanded would go down. And we'd also expect the price to fall because it's less desirable. Another determinant of demand, the expected future price. So if you expected ice cream to rise, and often in economics I like to look at things with a little bit of drama, but it's the same thing if it rises a little bit, if it rises a lot. It just is easier to see if prices were to rise substantially, what do you think would happen? People would probably buy ice cream now, and the demand for ice cream would increase, especially if they can store it in a freezer. If you were to know, on the other hand, that the price of ice cream is going to fall next week, then you would probably stop purchasing ice cream now and wait till next week, and the demand curve would shift to the left. Okay, so we expect future prices to go up. So you're going to buy more now. So the demand curve is going to shift to the right. We'll call this D2, Q2, P2, and we see that price has increased and the quantity demanded has increased. Changes in income. Now we're going to look at a very specific case. Actually, we're going to return to Popeye on the next PowerPoint on supply. So there is a relevance to having him here. But a normal good is one for which an increase in consumers' income shifts the demand curve rightwards. So in other words, a normal good, and the relationship is definitely income, not price. So we have, when you earn more money, you generally want more of everything. More orange juice, more DVDs, more movies, more restaurant meals, more clothes. The list goes on and on. A normal good also works the other way. If your income decreases, then you generally buy less of things that are normal goods. So again, the orange juice and taxi rides and whatever. An inferior good, on the other hand, is where if you have an increase in consumers' income, this is something you can't wait to get rid of because you only consume it because you've been at such a low income. So what happens is that the demand curve shifts leftwards. There's a decrease in demand because you can't wait to get rid of it. On the other hand, if you are becoming poorer and your income has gone down, well, unfortunately, now you have to consume more of this good because you can't afford the other goods. So an example I like to bring up is Spam. It's sort of jellied meat that's in a tin that sits on a shelf for a long time. It could be, for some people, secondhand clothes. Gruel, whatever type of porridge that is, that you might have to buy because you can't afford other things that you would prefer. Also, the larger the population, the greater the demand, so the demand curve would shift to the right, and the smaller would be the smaller population would lead to less demand, so shifting left. Changes in people's preferences, so something could become in vogue or no longer desirable. So if that happens, people again would either demand more if it becomes more popular or less if it's no longer popular. So true or false? If false, let's rewrite so the statement is correct. The price of bananas has increased. Therefore, the demand for bananas will increase. Okay, if the price of the good in question has increased, Does the demand curve shift? The answer is no. So we need to strike this out. So if the price of bananas has increased, there is a movement along the demand curve. Not a shift of the demand curve. And we know, according to the law of demand, if there's an increase in price, what happens to quantity demanded? It's going to go down. Thank you.